What's going on, guys? Lon here from Android Authority, and an ongoing trend that's been happening a lot lately is manufacturers releasing a better spec'd version of their current flagship, and now Xiaomi is taking part in that trend with the Mi Note and essentially putting it on steroids. This is the Xiaomi Mi Note Pro. In a manner of speaking, the Mi Note Pro could be looked at as the bigger brother to the regular Mi Note because of the ramped up specs, but physically it's actually not any bigger. In fact, they're practically identical in pretty much every way, from the display size to the overall size and shape. The Mi Note Pro features the same metal and glass construction with 2.5D glass on the front that gently curves along the edges, and 3D glass on the back that features more pronounced curves along the left and right sides. All of that is held together by a metal frame with chamfered edges, but to signify that this is the Pro version of the phone, the frame has been treated with a gold finish versus the silver finish on the regular Mi Note. The ring around the camera and Mi logo on the back has also been treated with the same gold color to match. The design isn't overly flashy, but it's a very beautiful looking phone and it feels great in the hand. Like most phones that feature a glass back panel, it does tend to feel a bit slippery and is very prone to fingerprints, but the chamfered edges along the metal frame certainly make the phone easier to grip. Just like the standard Mi Note, one-handed usability is surprisingly not that bad. With a 5.7-inch screen, the Mi Note Pro is still a large phone, but Xiaomi has done an incredible job with keeping the device thin and shrinking down the side bezels, so it's not quite as difficult to use in one hand as you might initially think, although there still is a little bit of shuffling required to reach every corner of the display. To help make the phone more manageable, the power and volume keys are located on the right side where they can easily be reached with your thumb. The power and volume keys are also made of metal and they're very tactile and easy to press, so they feel every bit as good as the rest of the phone. The remaining ports are in pretty typical locations, with the 3.5mm headset jack up top, micro USB port and a single speaker at the bottom, and the SIM card slot is on the left side. On the front are capacitive keys below the display, and a multicolored LED notification light is up top next to the front-facing camera, earpiece, and other typical sensors. As mentioned earlier, the display still measures in at 5.7 inches, which makes it great for consuming all sorts of media and playing games, but the resolution has been bumped up to Quad HD or 2560 by 1440, giving off a whopping 515 ppi. The screen is extremely sharp, you're not going to be able to notice any pixels. On top of that, colors are very rich and vibrant. The screen exhibits a great amount of contrast with some very deep blacks for an LCD, and viewing angles are really good. Xiaomi also includes some color calibration settings built into the software to tweak the display more to your liking, but the default out of the box settings are already good as is, so I never felt the need to make any changes. There's even a reading mode that makes the screen much easier on the eyes, so you're not straining your eyes when looking at the screen for long periods of time. The screen also does a great job of detracting glare and is very easy to see in broad daylight, and a lot of that can be contributed to what Xiaomi calls a sunlight display, which actually makes adjustments at the hardware level to each individual pixel for better real-time contrast and outdoor readability versus just ramping up the display brightness to compensate like most typical displays tend to do. Internally, the Mi Note Pro is packing the latest Snapdragon 810 processor, which has received quite a bit of flack since its inception, but regardless, it's still one of the most powerful chipsets currently available. The Mi Note Pro is also one of the few phones on the market to be packing 4GB of RAM. That's LPDDR4 RAM, by the way, which is almost 2 times faster than the older DDR3 RAM and much more power efficient. Phones are getting so fast nowadays that it's really hard to notice much of a difference from one phone to the next, but the Mi Note Pro can more than hold its own against the best of the competition. In day-to-day usage, the Mi Note Pro is extremely fluid and responsive, despite the fact that our review unit is still running beta software. Everything from navigating through the general UI, opening up applications, and playing games has been a very pleasurable experience, and of course with 4GB of DDR4 RAM, multitasking between light and heavier applications like games doesn't faze the Mi Note Pro one bit. The only thing I noticed was when playing games or watching videos, the Mi Note Pro does tend to run a little bit warm, and you can definitely feel the heat dissipating through the metal frame and the back glass, but I wouldn't say it ever gets to the point where it feels uncomfortable unreadable or it's completely unusable, so it is something to be aware of, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's a huge concern. Other hardware on the Mi Note Pro includes 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and this is actually the only configuration that will be available. For most people, this will be more than enough storage, but if you're looking to expand via micro SD, you don't have that option here. As with any other modern day smartphone, LTE connectivity is available, but since this phone is not designed for the US market or any market outside of China really, I was limited to HSPA Plus on T-Mobile's network, but it was still plenty fast for pretty much anything that I wanted to do. Speaker quality from the bottom mounted speaker is also quite good as it gets plenty loud for a single driver without sounding distorted, but as with any other bottom firing speaker, it can be very easy to muffle when holding the device in landscape, and the sideways firing audio creates for a lopsided listening experience. The Mi Note Pro retains the same 13 megapixel optically stabilized rear camera as the standard Mi Note, which isn't a bad thing by any means, and Xiaomi is quite proud of the fact that they were able to keep the camera flush to the body despite the built-in OIS and the phone being less than 7mm thin. The camera software is pretty simple. Swiping down or to the left will reveal a bunch of filters that you can play around with to your heart's content, and swiping the opposite direction is where you'll find your standard shooting modes like manual and panorama, along with a few others like beautify and refocus for refocusing your shot after the fact. You can tap on the viewfinder to change the point of focus just like any other smartphone, but being able to adjust the exposure at the same time through the on-screen exposure dial is definitely one of the most intuitive aspects of Xiaomi's camera UI. The camera software also allows for adjustments to be made to the exposure settings, contrast, saturation, and sharpness for more granular controls over the image quality. Speaking of image quality, it's just as good as it was on the Mi Note, which is really no surprise considering it's the same sensor and camera software. The shutter speed is nice and quick, so it's really easy to get a photo with tack-sharp focus, and the resulting images are vibrant, rich in color, with a great amount of contrast and dynamic range in both indoor and outdoor situations. The camera is also capable of taking some rather impressive macro shots with a very clear subject of focus in the foreground and a nice and clean bokeh effect in the background. Auto HDR is also available on this camera to help take out the guesswork on when to use HDR, and the HDR processing itself does a great job of bringing out some extra details in the shadows while adding a nice level of boost in saturation without appearing unnatural. Where this camera struggles the most is in low light and nighttime photography. The increase in digital noise is to be expected, but there's just a lot of noise reduction going on that results in some softer details, and highlights tend to get blown out like street lights and lampposts, for example. The camera also tends to hunt for focus more often than I'd like, and many of the images will have some noticeable artifacting. Overall though, this is really not a bad camera to have in your pocket. With the front camera, Xiaomi chose to not go with a higher megapixel count and instead took HTC's approach by going with a lower resolution 4 megapixel sensor with a larger pixel size of 2 microns. This allows for more light to enter the camera and better quality images, so if selfies are your thing, then the front camera is not going to disappoint. 4K video recording is also possible with the Mi Note Pro, and the OIS does a great job of keeping the footage stable when you're walking or moving around, and the continuous autofocus is very quick to focus when moving between close and far away subjects, and manual control over focusing is also available just by tapping on the viewfinder. Another aspect of the Mi Note that transitioned over to the Mi Note Pro is the battery capacity. So it's the same 3000 mAh battery, but with the increase in specs like the Quad HD display, the Snapdragon 810, and the 4GB of RAM, without an increase in the battery to compensate for those specs, battery life leaves a lot to be desired. And you can get through a full day if you stay away from heavy things like gaming or watching a lot of videos, but if you like to watch a lot of videos or play a lot of games on your phone like I do, you'll find yourself connected to a charger pretty frequently midway through the day. Now, keep in mind that this phone isn't optimized for networks outside of China, so that may have some impact on the battery life. But on the bright side, the phone does support Quick Charge 2.0, which will allow you to get up to 70% charge in just 1 hour. Without digging digging into the software details, it might be hard to tell at first glance that the Mi Note Pro is running Android 5.0 Lollipop, and a lot of that has to do with Xiaomi's MIUI interface. MIUI doesn't adopt much of the material design aesthetics from Lollipop, if any, to be honest, and it's a lot like the interfaces you get from other Chinese OEMs with colorful squared icons and the lack of an app drawer. In this particular software build on the Mi Note Pro, there's actually very little pre-installed bloatware to be had, which was great to see, and even though MIUI changes much of Google's vision of Android, it adds more to the experience than it takes away. For first-time MIUI users, this will be a very different experience, but Xiaomi's skin isn't overbearing in any way and brings about a handful of useful features. Hi-Fi audio is still available in the settings for better quality audio when listening to headphones, and a one-handed mode that lets you shrink the screen from anywhere between 3.5 to 4.5 inches just by swiping outwards on the home button in either direction. MIUI also offers one of the most robust theme engines available on any Android skin. There's hundreds of various different themes to choose from, so you're bound to find at least a few that suits your taste, and these themes alter pretty much every part of the OS, from the system UI, lock screen, icons, wallpapers, and even the default applications like the dialer and messaging apps. As great of a phone as the Mi Note Pro may be, the unfortunate part is its price and availability. The phone is currently only available in China for $29.99 RMB, which is roughly $480 US, but if you're in the US or any other part of the world, you'll most likely be looking at a hefty premium to import the device, and without a wider range of LTE support, other flagship devices like the G4 and S6 will be a more viable option that can offer a more than comparable experience. Xiaomi says that the Mi Note Pro is the best smartphone in the world to date, and while that statement can certainly be subjective, the extremely impressive hardware both inside and out and great user experience makes it tough to argue otherwise. It's just a shame that more people won't be able to get their hands on it. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up down below, and also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below if you haven't already. And if you want to see more, make sure to check out the links on the side, and also check out the website as well for more in-depth coverage, AndroidAuthority.com, because we are your source for all things Android.